You've lost the ability to sit in a quiet room, not because anything's wrong with your hearing, because something changed in your relationship to silence itself. You reach for the fan, the podcast, the 10-hour rain track, the TV mumbling in the other room. And not always because you enjoy the noise, but because without it, something comes up. Something you'd rather not sit with. This isn't really about sound. It's about what happens when the sound stops. But before we get into what silence brings up, it's worth asking something simpler. When did we start needing noise just to feel okay? Think about the rituals. Earbuds in, before you've even closed the front door. A podcast layered underneath your work, not because you're actually listening, but because the quiet underneath it feels worse. The TV on in an empty apartment, not for the show, for the feeling of company. And look, for some people, this is just preference, a texture they like having around. But for a growing number of us, it's become something more like emotional padding. The real question isn't why people enjoy background noise. It's why silence now feels like being trapped alone with your own mind. To understand how quiet became this unbearable, you have to look at what 2 decades of constant input actually did to the brain's relationship with stillness. Gloria Mark, a researcher at UC Irvine, tracked how long people could hold attention on a single screen. In 2004, the average was about 2.5 minutes. By 2020, roughly 47 seconds. And that's not because we got lazy. It's because digital environments train the brain's reward system to expect constant incoming stimulation. The average person now encounters somewhere between 6,000 and 10,000 ads and digital messages every single day. That creates a noise floor the mind starts treating as normal, as baseline. And boredom, which used to be, honestly, kind of useful, research out of the University of Central Lancashire has actually linked it to increased creativity and reflective thinking. Boredom now gets treated like an emergency, something to kill immediately. So we didn't just lose quiet. We lost what quiet used to give us access to. A mind that's never unoccupied gradually loses its ability to sit with its own experience. And when silence finally shows up, all that unprocessed material hits at once. That's why a quiet room can feel emotionally louder than a crowded street. Silence stopped being the absence of sound. It became the sudden presence of everything else. Thoughts, feelings, memories you hadn't touched in years, unresolved stuff. In 2014, psychologist Timothy Wilson and his colleagues at the University of Virginia ran a study where they asked people to sit alone in a quiet room for 6 to 15 minutes. Nothing to do. Just their own thoughts. About 67% of men and 25% of women chose to give themselves electric shocks rather than just sit there. Think about that. Actual pain felt preferable to stillness. That's not weakness. That's evidence of how activating unfiltered self-contact has become. When external input drops away, the mind turns inward, and it surfaces identity questions, postponed grief, future anxiety, quiet self-evaluation. For someone whose inner world has been constantly buffered, that doesn't feel like rest. It feels like exposure. Silence didn't become hostile. It became honest. So if silence is what reveals, what exactly is all that noise protecting you from? Sometimes it's grief you kept postponing, anxiety that never quite found words, shame that stayed just below the surface, loneliness that's easier to mute than to name, a kind of diffuse emptiness that only becomes visible when everything else turns off, and comfort noise. It creates the feeling of companionship, of safety, of movement. That's not pathological. That's a coping structure built by a mind doing its best. But buffering is not the same thing as healing. Sound can delay, almost indefinitely, the encounter with whatever emotional reality it was meant to soften. Noise is sometimes less about what you want to hear and more about what you're trying not to. The capacity for stillness can erode, but that doesn't mean it's gone. It just means it needs rebuilding. Gently. Start smaller than silence. A short walk without audio. 5 quiet minutes before bed. A cup of tea with nothing playing in the background. Not discipline, just a small experiment, and expect some discomfort. That's normal. It's worth distinguishing that from actual distress which might need more support. Silence isn't emptiness. It's space. Maybe the real issue isn't that the world got louder. It's that we forgot what quiet was for. Silence was never supposed to feel like abandonment. It was supposed to feel like room. Room to breathe, to think, to just be there with yourself. The question isn't whether you can survive silence. It's whether you can slowly learn to make it feel like home again.